So in this video, I want to talk about my home lab. And I want to talk about some of the things that I'm using, why I'm using them, and also the specs of the systems that I'm running. Essentially just your bog standard home lab tour from Lawrence Systems or Raid Owl or someone, but hopefully an enjoyable one. Let's get into it. When it comes to the router I went with, I decided to go with the AliExpress route. And I picked up one of those cheap 2.5 gigabit little fanless boxes for about 120 quid, 120 pounds. And I bought this to replace my old router, which was a third gen Intel desktop. I had literally just stuck a NIC into the DVD drive slot, and it was just kind of hanging there. Not great, but it worked. When it comes to the specs for my router, it has a Intel Celeron N5105. Now this is a 4-core, 4-threaded Jasper Lake CPU. It was released in Q1 of 2021 and has a 10-watt TDP, which means it has low power draw, which is really good. It has a single stick or 4GB DDR4 SODIMM memory. This isn't ECC, but I've never really had a problem, so it doesn't bother me too much. And then it also has a 128GB SSD just for the boot drive. I didn't have anything smaller when it comes to SATA, so I just chucked one of them in there because I have so many as well. It also has 4 Intel i226-V NICs. Now these NICs are all 2.5 gigabit, which means I can have super fast speeds. For me, this is a benefit, as both my PC and my NAS have 2.5 gigabit NICs in them. And in the future, if I get a 2.5 gig switch, plug it into the router, and boom, 2.5 gig to everything. When it comes to the operating system, it's running pfSense CE or Community Edition, and this is the main router for me and all of the servers and computers I'm running. Some things that I do have running on it, other than just, the normal routing stuff and DHCP and all that, is I have HA Proxy running on it. What I'm using HA Proxy for is as a way to give all of my services a domain name, so that rather than putting the IP in, I can put in a URL, which will just direct me to that IP anyway, kind of like just how a normal one is. This also lets me give all of my devices, when I'm accessing them, a TLS certificate as well. It's also running Snort, which, if you don't know, is an IDPS or Intrusion Detection and Prevention system. And I installed this on here simply just because I wanted to experiment with it. That's really it. And I wanted to see its capabilities, what it could do, and some of the logging that you can get from it. Moving on to what's next to the router is my switch and Pi-hole. The switch is it's a managed switch from Netgear, or like a smart managed switch. I've never really used it, used the interface and whatnot. I know it does have some VLAN management stuff, but with 8 ports, there's not much point doing any VLAN management. And especially because it's all just serving me. Well, what's the point, I'm not running any IoT devices or anything like that on it either. So it really just doesn't make sense for me to use a lot of those features that are built into it. But they are nice to have in case I ever want to use them. The little computer that's on top of the switch, that is an Orange Pi 02. And I'm using this for Pi-hole. This is one of 2 Pi-hole servers that I'm running at home, and this is the main one. When it comes to the specs of this little single-board computer, has a Allwinner H616. This is an ARM-based quad-core. It's not the most powerful thing, but since it's just a Pi-hole, it basically just sits there and does nothing. The load average is probably really low as well, so it fits the bill. I forgot to mention that this also has 1 GB of DDR3 on board it as well. When it comes to the storage, I decided to go with a 32 GB SanDisk SD card. I just went with this because it was one I had on hand, and since it's just running Pi-hole and nothing else, it didn't need much more than 32 GB of storage. For networking, it has just a single gigabit NIC on it as well. When it comes to the operating system, I decided to go with Armbian Linux. I decided to go with this over the provided distros from Orange Pi because it just had a bit more luck when it came to getting into SSH with them and running it headless. So I never bothered plugging in a monitor, and it also uses micro HDMI, which is stupid And then I just have Pi-hole installed on top of this, and that's all it runs. It's nothing special. It idles at around 40 degrees, sometimes 45 degrees, depending on the weather and how hot the things next to it are getting. But other than that, it's been rock solid, and I haven't really had to bother with it since. In order to give things like my phone access to Wi-Fi and to the network, I went with an TP-Link Archer AX50. I got this for £50 on eBay from the TP-Link refurbished store, and it has been pretty good up until it wasn't. Now, for context, I have gigabit internet for this. The speed was going from 400 to 100 as I do a speed test. The 1 gig ports that are on it were running at 100 megabit, and when I upgraded my router from the old HP system to this, it wasn't acting as an access point anymore. So I'm currently having to run it in router mode just for Wi-Fi, or basically just a phone and a laptop. I want to replace it, but because it does so little, there's not really any point replacing it. Next up is the third computer that's on the bottom of my desk. This is my virtualization host, and it is a HP 260 G3. Got a Core i5-7200U, which is a dual core with 4 threading, so admittedly it is quite underpowered, but is also still power efficient. There's 16 gigabytes of DDR4 SODIMM memory, and it has a 256 gig NVMe SSD as its boot drive, and a 240 gigabyte SSD for the VMs. And then when it comes to the operating system that I'm using for this hypervisor, I'm using Proxmox 7.4. I haven't upgraded to 8, but that's because I have some plans for the future where this will get replaced. Now, I don't need to replace it because realistically, I'm not using up all the resources in it, even with a bunch of VMs and containers running, because I'm not running anything too heavy. But in the odd instance that I am, like for say running a Minecraft server, whether it be a normal paper or a modded survival world, that's when you start running into a bit of trouble with this. So I do want to upgrade it. When it comes to what's actually running on this, I have 4 containers and then 3 VMs. From the 4 containers, there are only 3 up, those being Uptime Kuma, Pi-hole, and Bitwarden. I decided to run these as containers on Proxmox just because they don't need to have actual virtualization, like an actual virtual machine. They can run in a container just fine, and I haven't had any issues with them at all. Uptime Kuma is monitoring all of my virtual machines. It's monitoring all of my servers as well that aren't the virtual ones. So my NAS, it's monitoring my print server, it's monitoring my router, and also my other DNS server as well. I decided to call my DNS servers Blizzard for the one that's on the Orange Pi, Blizzardo for the one that's on the VM. I like coming up with weird names. When it comes to the VMs, there are 3 VMs set on this. One of them is a Docker VM, the next one is Home Assistant, and the third one is Tailscale. Before switching to Tailscale, I was using WireGuard. WireGuard was great. I didn't have any problems with it and it was working flawlessly, but I had to change it because when I changed ISPs, the one I have now, it also changed something very crucial. My IP is now dynamic, whereas before it was static. But that was something I was willing to accept because I knew I could just use this. And it was also much faster speed, gigabit up and down, which my previous ISP just wasn't providing. Home Assistant has been fantastic for me. I have had a few bugs here and there where sometimes it would just suddenly stop working or it would suddenly slow down and some of the devices weren't syncing up with it, but that only happens every so often and it's fine for me. Some of the things I have connected to it are my lights, a motion sensor, and a button. These are all connected using Zigbee and it's been flawless. I use all of these with automations as well. So when I walk in, the lights turn on in a set period of time, and then the lights turn off after 5 minutes or so of inactivity. The Docker VM isn't doing too much, but in the past it was hosting a Minecraft server for me and my friends, and my brother as well. At the minute it's only hosting a couple of things, those being my Homer dashboard and my Heimdall dashboard, which I'm not using too much, I use it just for backup. And then it also has Firefly, and Firefly is my finance manager. It's also running Portainer. Portainer's dashboard is super nice and super clean, and Portainer itself is super easy to use. Moving on to what is the biggest server currently in my network is my NAS. This is a TrueNAS box, TrueNAS scale. In terms of specs for TrueNAS, it's got a Core i5-9500T. This is just a 6-core, 6-threaded CPU, so it's not got hyper-threading. But it is more powerful than I need, and it's also very power efficient. When idling, the system stays around 35 watts, and under load, it gets to about 50. For memory, it's got 32 gigabytes of DDR4. This isn't ECC, but again, just like with my router, I've never had a problem with it, so I just haven't bothered upgrading it or changing it to ECC, because that would need me to change the CPU and the motherboard just to change the memory. And when it comes to the storage pools, it's just got two terabyte SSDs, and they're just pooled redundantly. In terms of network connectivity, it's got a 2.5 gigabit NIC, and it's got a 1 gigabit NIC as well. The 2.5 gigabit NIC is the one that's actually being used, and that plugs directly into the router. And then, like I said before, it's using TrueNAS Scale. Since TrueNAS Scale is just Linux under the hood, it means that the application support is vast, because it's basically just using Kubernetes under the hood, which is Docker, for the applications. On here, I have 7 applications running: PhotoPrism, MeTube, Plex, SyncThing, Collabra, Nextcloud, and Jellyfin. I use PhotoPrism to send pictures from my phone to the NAS wirelessly. I use MeTube in order to download videos off of YouTube. Plex is used to play back some of the footage that I have. Now, this isn't Linux ISOs, this is all just pictures and videos of me, my family, and things like that. Jellyfin is just a backup for Plex. Plex can sometimes be annoying, so I have Jellyfin there in case things go a bit funky. SyncThing is used to back up the files on my PC to the NAS. Now, this is only the stuff contained in the Documents folder. I don't bother doing much else because the Documents folder has most of the important files, so those are the most valuable to me. Then Collabra and Nextcloud work in conjunction with each other. I haven't really used Nextcloud, but that's because for some reason it won't let me provide it a domain name, so I can't use it without without it being self-signed. I think this is just a Docker thing. Maybe having it as a VM might work, but I haven't gotten around to testing it because I haven't really had a need for Nextcloud. I know it's good, and I do want to use it in the future, but it's not really got much value for me at the minute. Last but not least, got Octoprint, and this is the print server for my Creality Ender 3 V2, which I got a couple years back for about £200 on AliExpress, and it's not running on a Raspberry Pi. It's actually running on the same board as Pi-hole and Orange Pi 02, because on GitHub there is a project called OctoCitrico, and this essentially put Octoprint on different single board computers, and one of them was the Orange Pi 02. The nice thing as well is it was cheap. It was about £30 for the board, and this Orange Pi board has not given me any problems with Octoprint, even if it is a custom firmware. Talking about the printer itself, it started off life as an Ender 3 V2, and then eventually I changed out the hot end with a Sprite extruder. The space that I have for it is quite tight, and having it be a Bowden tube which comes from the side rather than from the top was quite annoying, and I just did it more for convenience than for improving the print quality. I was also using the Emrisco C firmware as well, just so it all works together, and it's been working great. But when it comes to my home lab, that's all there is to it at the minute, but not for long. I do have some big upgrades planned that is basically going to change most of it, so we'll have to see how that all goes. And some of that stuff you've seen the boxes for during the pfSense part with the different camera angle. All those boxes are upgrades for my home lab. We'll have to see how it goes then, but for now this is what I'm using.